We have been talking about the cycle of loving our neighbors. It's the second greatest commandment, to love your neighbors as you love yourself, which means we need to actually love them and treat them as we would ourselves. It's not an intellectual exercise. It's a commandment, and it happens to be the second greatest commandment in all of the universe. And then teaching people to love God. Today in class, we were talking about how our reflection reflects Christ back to people. As Christians, we're being transformed into the image of Christ, and that image is reflected back to unbelievers. We've got to teach people who God is and how to love God and move other people, including each other, to serving others. Faith without works is dead. Our theme this year is straining toward the goal. I think it's a very fitting theme for the current situation that a lot of people find themselves in. It's just life is difficult. Straining toward the goal. And our theme verses are Philippians 3, 13 and 14. Paul says, "Brothers, I do not consider that I've made it my own." Talking about suffering to the point of death. I've not made that my own. But one thing I do, forgetting what lies behind and straining forward to what lies ahead, I press on toward the goal for the prize of the upward call of God in Christ Jesus. And I love the song that we just sang. I intentionally chose the song that has all three verses because there is a version that just has the first verse. But the third verse, I think, is really fitting. "And at the end of our journey, we shall bow down on bended knee, and with the angels up in heaven, we'll shout the song of victory." It's so fitting for this theme and for this life and living as Christians. Today, we're going to talk about encouragement and the need for encouragement and to encourage one another and spur one another on. It's no secret that one of my soapboxes, you guys learn my soapboxes pretty quickly here, but one of my soapboxes is especially in a political season, just the meanness that people express towards one another, and the vast opinions and strong opinions and the need to express opinions. And I think in this current climate, kindness goes a long way, and encouragement goes a long way. There are a bunch of different studies on this, but the impact of encouragement on the psyche, not the psycho, on the psyche. The impact of encouragement on the psyche, these are some bullet points from a handful of different studies, but some of the impacts on our own psyche when people encourage us is enhanced self-esteem. I think we could probably all agree with that. When people encourage you, it's better than discouragement. Have we ever been discouraged and you hear all the criticisms about all the dumb things that you do wrong, but you don't hear the things that you do right? And what does that do to your self-esteem? It plummets if you're hearing all the things that you do wrong. The opposite of that is that your self-esteem increases when people encourage you. There's reduced stress and anxiety because you're not looking over your shoulder like, well, what am I going to screw up this time and disappoint the person who, whether it's your boss or a spouse or your kids or whoever it is in your life, you're not constantly worrying about what you're going to mess up because people encourage you and they say things like, "You're doing a good job. Keep it up." Increased motivation. Encouragement is a motivator to do more things. If we know that people are pleased with the work we do, we tend to increase our workload and do it happily. Improved mood. That goes without saying. And greater resilience. We're able to work through difficult situations and stick them through because we know that somebody is shouting us on from behind. They're cheering us on. They're encouraging us. They're saying, "You can do this. You've got this. Keep going." Simon Sinek, I've talked about him before, but he's one of the top motivational speakers for businesses in the world. And he has a book, Start With Why, and he says you've got to begin with the why in your life. Why am I here? What's my purpose? And you move from the why to the how. how do I accomplish my why? How do I carry this out? And then the what is the third and final stage, and that is, what do I do with this? And how do I express this to people, and how do I carry this on, this kind of legacy? But he very famously says that the human brain is not wired to learn from negatives. And he said our whole culture is based on negatives. And don't do this, don't do that. Don't, like we teach our kids from a young age. We use the word don't more than, instead of doing this, why don't you try doing this? And he says, we really need to redirect people. And he uses an example, and he said, don't think about an elephant. You can't not think about an elephant, right? Don't do drugs. I mean, this is applied to all kinds of different areas. What are you going to be thinking about when things are framed in a negative? You're going to be thinking about the very thing that you're not supposed to do. And the brain is not wired, we've not been wired by God to think that way. We were wired for encouragement and for purpose and to be redirected and to think creatively. God is a creative God. And so going back to the impact of encouragement, we talked about impact of encouragement on the the psyche. Now we're going to talk about the impact of encouragement on job performance. And this applies to part of that circle, serving others. Our job as Christians, think about work. We've been put here for good works. According to Paul, he says we were created for good works. Your good works doesn't gain you merit or salvation. However, we were put here for good works. We were put here to do good things for other people. The impact of encouragement on job performance: increased productivity, improved quality of work. All of a sudden, QC goes up. Improved creativity, greater job satisfaction, and then finally, stronger teamwork. Encouragement pushes us, it motivates us, it causes us to do better. It causes us to be better. It causes us to improve. I don't know about you, but sometimes it's hard to encourage people, isn't it? Sometimes we look at people and we're like, I don't have a lot to work with here. They're not really giving me a whole lot to work with, but we still have to find ways to encourage people. This is my favorite part of the whole set of studies on encouragement, and this dates back to as old as I am, and I won't give certain dates, but his little Satan back there in the purple shirt reminded me I'm halfway to 90, and then he skips out on his own birthday. But this study is, about 44 years old, 45 years old, and it's by Edward Deci and Richard Ryan, and it's called the self-determination theory. And they learned that this whole wheel of encouragement, what the most fascinating part of that is that people can be self-motivated or self-determined when you combine that with encouragement. Just a little bit of fuel goes a very long way. Here's some of the key points, is that intrinsic and not extrinsic motivation is a key component. In other words, things that we internalize, things that come from within and not things from the outside. So an example of an extrinsic motivation is, well, we're going to pay you more, we're going to increase your pay so that you do a better job. What they found is it has about this much impact. We tend to try to almost bribe people into doing better. If you do this, I've heard parents do this, if you behave, I'll give you a candy bar. Guess what? Bribes don't work with kids. They're like, so what? You're going to give me the candy bar anyway. Yeah, they know, Terry, they know. So extrinsic motivation, external factors don't really work. We have to internalize things. We have to make them our own. That's where our motivation comes from. And so there are three psychological needs that fuel intrinsic motivation. One is autonomy, and that doesn't mean being separate from other people. What it means is that we're increasing options that people have. Do you ever hear this saying, we need that person to think that this idea is their own. They need to make it their own. Right? We've all done it. A big fat Greek wedding, that's right. Right? Let me put it another way. We take credit for things even if we participated just a little bit in it. Why? Why do we take certain credit and be like, hey, I was a part of that project? Eden, you just talked to me the other day about that, didn't you? People take credit for things that they were minimally involved in because of autonomy. It increases our autonomy and makes us feel like, hey, I contributed to this really cool project. I was a contributor. I may not have contributed much, but I was a contributor. It motivates us. Look at how this turned out. Look at the final result. That's motivating for us. When we see something work out, we're like, wow. Look at the end result. That's autonomy. Competence. We want to be viewed as competent people, all of us. That is inherent. God designed us that way. We want to feel like we've contributed something and we are competent. This motivates us intrinsically. Inside, it motivates us to do more, to be better. And what they found is, this is fascinating to me because this ties so much into encouragement. Unexpected positive feedback increases intrinsic motivation to complete the task. In other words, if somebody unexpectedly gives you positive feedback along the way, you're going to push that project to the very end. Because you say, somebody recognizes the work that I'm doing and they appreciate it. Money doesn't motivate people. I'm going to give you more money if you complete the project. It works for a little bit, and they found in this study, like, those extrinsic motivators will work for a time, but then they fall off a cliff, and then they no longer work. You could give 50,000 pay increases, and it won't improve the work, the production of work, or the quality of the work. People are motivated intrinsically. They want to know that they're competent. Relatedness is the third component. It's a psychological need. We all have the need to relate to other people. This is the will to interact with, to be connected to, and to experience caring for others. We want to know that what we did matters to somebody else, that it impacted their life in some way. It's interesting, there are all kinds of studies that are done on very successful business people who created, invented different things, or started a business. What they found is that this narrative that all the rich care about is getting rich, they just care about money, and that's why they started the business, they're only in it for the money. They found that that's about 0% true. That literally every person who started a business from the ground up and who just ground day after day after day after day and had successes and failures and kept pushing through, that they wanted to make a difference in the life of somebody else. That they wanted a product or a service or something that makes a difference, that makes somebody else's life a little bit easier. That was the motivating factor. This is a psychological need. And so we're motivated by encouragement. God knows this. I'm going to back up just a little bit from Acts 18. I'm not going to read this. I'm just going to tell you guys what was going on in Corinth. Paul goes into Corinth, and for some reason, I think Paul felt really alone. He felt alienated. A lot of his companions weren't able to go with him. If you remember, on the missionary journey, he went through Berea. We all talk about Berea. Well, they searched the scriptures, be a Berean. When he went through Berean and Thessalonica and all those different areas, he was chased out with pitchforks, and people wanted to kill him. What happened is that he had to move so quickly that he was separated from his companions. And then he starts making the rest of his trip, and he doesn't meet up with people again until he's in Corinth. So when he lands in Corinth, he's alone. I mean, alone. I think Paul was scared, intimidated. In verse 9 of chapter 18, it says, "And the Lord said to Paul one night in a vision, 'Do not be afraid, but go on speaking, and do not be silent, for I am with you. And no one will attack you or harm you, for I have many in this city who are my people.'" And he stayed 1 year and 6 months, one of the longest tenures that Paul had anywhere. That's an interesting expression, too, that God has many people in that city, because this is an unchurched city. To our knowledge, there were about exactly 0 Christians in this city. And so God is encouraging Paul and saying, I have people here. They may not be Christians yet, but I've got people in this city. They've got your back. And then there's extreme turmoil within the city. The Jewish people, surprise, surprise, come in, and they're agitating people. Gallio was the proconsul of Achaia, so he's the Roman ruler. The Jews made a united attack on Paul, and they brought him before the tribunal. They said, "This man is persuading people to worship God contrary to the law." Paul's about to open his mouth. Gallio said to the Jews, "If this were a matter of wrongdoing or vicious crime, O Jews, I would have reason to accept your complaint. But since it's a matter of questions about words and names and your own law, see to it yourselves. I refuse to be a judge of these things." He drives them out from the tribunal, and the next thing that happens is crazy to me. Imagine if this happened right here, right now, in this worship assembly. And they all seized Sosthenes, the ruler of the synagogue, and beat him in front of the tribunal. But Gallio paid no attention to this. In other words, he turned a blind eye and was like, whatever. Whatever happens, I didn't see a thing. Now, I want you to imagine in the context of Paul, after Paul gets this stamp from God, I will be with you, I've got your back, nothing bad's going to happen to you, which technically is true, but it happened to other people. Paul witnessed people coming after him, persecuting him, trying to trip him up, beating Sosthenes, who Paul no doubtedly was working with, who he was teaching and instructing and molding and discipling. And they take him out and they beat him in front of the entire tribunal. And then we have our very next verse, and listen so carefully to this. After this, after the beating in front of the tribunal, after this, Paul stayed many days longer, and he took leave of the brothers, and he set sail for Syria, and with him Priscilla and Aquila. At Caesarea he had cut his hair, for he was under a vow. And they came to Ephesus, and he left them there, but he himself went into the synagogue and reasoned with the Jews. When they asked him to stay for a longer period, he declined, but on taking leave of them, he said, "I will return to you if God wills." And he set sail from Ephesus. And when he had landed at Caesarea, he went up and greeted the church and then went down to Antioch. That's Antioch of Syria, where Paul first was commissioned and sent out on his missionary journeys. The church in Antioch was a church that literally met inside a cave that they dug out. They hand dug this cave, and the Christians were meeting in this cave because of the persecution of Saul. They ended up becoming the sending church. His anchor, the church that Paul returned to, he was sent from on all 3 missionary journeys, that's the church Paul went to. He went down to Antioch, and after spending some time there, he departed and went from one place to the next through the region of Galatia and Phrygia, strengthening all the disciples. He went on an encouraging campaign. He was encouraging people and not holding their hand and not telling them all the bad things that they were doing and all the things that they messed up. By the way, raise of hands, do you guys think that the first Christians, when they came into a city or a town and they planted a church, do you think they made mistakes? Raise your hand if you think they made a lot of mistakes. Yeah. Paul knew something about the way that our Father designed us to be intrinsically motivated through encouragement. That, yeah, it's okay. We know from Paul's letters it is okay to point out major sin issues. Paul is not shy to do that. Certainly in 1 Corinthians, he's definitely not shy to point out all the things that they were doing to bring them to repentance. And he's clear about that. It's not to show you how stupid you are or how messed up you are or how awful of Christians you are, but it's the opposite. It's to bring you closer to Christ. It's to encourage you to do better. And I think in this world, I can speak personally, I can speak from years of experience. When you are disrupted by life, when your life is disrupted by life at large, by things going on in the world, in your home, in your own inner person, when those things are disrupted, it becomes extremely difficult to be an encourager. And that's why I point to Paul. And what we want to do is internalize things and be like, well, why is nobody showing up? Why is nobody calling me? Why is, and we start the why game. And I can tell you that is one of the most destructive things that we as humans can do. To ourselves, to our family, to one another. And the opposite of that is that one of the best things, one of the most productive things, you want to have a strong, productive, incredible church who can look in the face of destruction and life blowing up and death and all kinds of things that are going on, and they still press through and they're still joyful and they're still productive and they're still doing things for their neighbor, even though a family member of theirs just died a few days ago, but they're still going and washing their neighbor's laundry and doing things like that. You want that kind of a church? Encourage them. And Paul knew this. And even in the midst of his own suffering and being drugged before this tribunal and having Sosthenes beaten in front of them all, which served as a threat. That clearly was a threat. You keep it up, this is going to be you. That was the message. Paul didn't shut down. He didn't bite his fingernails. He wasn't like, oh no, what do we do? I guess we're screwing this whole gospel thing up. He didn't do any of that. He went on an encouragement campaign. He went around. He didn't complain about his own problems. He didn't complain about any other Christians. He didn't name call. He didn't point out all the other people who are screwing up his mission trip. And believe me, there were plenty. He didn't do that. He encouraged the brothers and sisters. He strengthened the disciples. Imagine if our churches networked and did this. Just this past week, there was such a drama blow up with some well-known, I won't mention a name, it doesn't matter, but it was a well-known person within the churches of Christ. And he kind of put some people on blast and put one of our universities on blast. And then, oh my goodness, did all the experts come out of the woodwork. And everybody was just attacking, at some point, I was reading comments and I'm like, they don't even know who they're arguing with or what point they're arguing. They don't even know at this point. They were just all shouting at each other and fighting and like, you're going to hell and no, you're going to hell and this person's worldly and you're worldly. And it was like, I'm like, this is insanity. Imagine if we took that effort and instead encouraged. By the way, they were all Christians. All of these people commenting and doing all these things, they were Christians. Imagine if they took that energy and they encouraged one another. They're like, I may disagree with what you said, but I can see you're a good family man. I can see that your kids are incredible Christians. I can see that you're doing great things for the kingdom. Like, imagine if we encouraged each other. And so that's my message for you today. Encouragement goes a long way, and I want to encourage you. I probably don't do this nearly enough. I'm so proud of this congregation in so many ways. I try not to look back, right? Paul says, I don't look back. I look towards the goal. I don't want to be a look backer in the sense that I don't want to look back and be like, oh man, like, in ministry, we should have done this different. I don't want to play those games. I just don't. I'm too far along in my stage of life to play those games. I'm not interested in looking back in that sense, but I'm interested in looking back sometimes at kind of taking inventory and being like, look at how much you all have done for God's kingdom. And when I stop and I take inventory, I am so stinking proud. And I just want to encourage you guys to keep blessing people. Not to call individual people out, but I look over here, and yep, you look shocked. I look at the people who you took in your home, you and your husband, and absolutely loved people when they were unlovable. And I look at where they are now. People who are addicted to drugs, who everybody gave up on, and they're raising families, and they're like, I've done weddings, and I'm like, this is incredible. They're raising incredible children. They're productive. They're not addicted to drugs and alcohol. That's not an accident. These things don't happen by accident. They happen by Christians being internally motivated to help. Keep doing it. Keep blessing people. Sometimes life knocks us around, and it's so easy to think nobody's noticing the things I'm doing. We notice. We notice the things you guys are doing. Keep doing them. Keep being good Christians. Keep blessing people. That's my message for you. I'm going to shut up now so we can eat food in a little bit, and so they don't replace me with Xander. So if there's anybody who has not taken that step to put Christ on a baptism and you're ready, or if you have prayer needs, we would encourage you to come forward as we all stand and sing this song together.